session, and I'm very happy to introduce Moorfoot from the University of Southampton, speaking on indeterministic grounding and physicality.
Thanks. So, yeah, I'll just jump straight into it, I guess. So in this paper, I'm going to explore the implications for what I've labeled indeterministic grounding for the distinction between physicalist and anti-physicalist theories of mind. So very roughly, I'll elucidate this in a second, but indeterministic grounding is supposed to be the idea that fact A can be the full ground of another fact B, but it's left to chance whether or not A is successful in grounding B. And at first sight, it looks like indeterministic grounding is exclusively anti-physicalist tool. And my argument is basically just going to be that sometimes indeterministic grounding can be treated as a physicalist tool as well. So just to give you a quick overview, my strategy is going to look something like this. I'm first going to introduce indeterministic grounding and set out an argument that I think gives us strong reasons to think that indeterministic grounding and physicalism are incompatible. I'm then going to set out a version of physicalism that I think is compatible with indeterministic grounding. And the version of physicalism that I have in mind is quite strict. It's strict in some other varieties of physicalism, and it also seems to be a fairly natural way of understanding the thesis. But nevertheless, it turns out that indeterministic grounding is consistent with this theory. And I'll conclude, that this initial verdict that indeterministic grounding and physicalism are incompatible, that was mistaken, and I think that to be a fairly surprising conclusion. So just to say a little bit about grounding, before indeterministic grounding, I'll understand grounding as a notion of a relation of non-causal metaphysical dependence, and it can be used to generate the less fundamental from more fundamental. So we can start off with, say, the facts, physical facts about Socrates, and then grounding takes us from those fundamental facts to the facts about qualia, so where Socrates sees the world subjectively, or we can start out with Socrates the man, and then we move the fact that he exists, and then grounding lets us move from that fact to the fact that a single set containing Socrates exists. And grounding relations like this are supposed to be, well, they're supposed to support metaphysical explanations. So we can explain why Socrates sees the world in the way he does by appealing to the physical facts about Socrates. And grounding relations are also nearly always taken to be deterministic, and by this I just mean that the probability of some ground B given this ground is always 1. So according to, I guess, some of the grounding folklore, a full ground can't be associated with multiple incompatible outcomes at the level of ground B. So it's this idea of multiple incompatible outcomes that I want to talk about here. So in this diagram, we've got 3 different and incompatible ways that Socrates might see the world. And let's just assume that these are like qualia inverse, basically. These are from the Stanford encyclopedia page with qualia inverse, something like that now. And each of these is supposed to be a potential ground B for the single ground. And because the outcomes are incompatible, which qualia fact gets grounded is left to chance, according to this system that I'm interested in. The ground, in some sense, underdetermines which fact gets grounded, and it's left to chance to basically settle the matter. And in the system, you don't need to make all of the assumptions I'm going to make, I think, to get this off the ground, just for simplicity. But each of these outcomes, I'm going to say, has a non-trivial probability of being the ground D. So in this case, each qualia fact is assigned a probability of a third. So we have different ways to think about this, but maybe quite a minimal notion here is if you have 100 microphysically identical duplicates of Socrates, and you can plot one out at random, the chance he's going to see the world in the first of these ways will be a third. And I'm going to take the chance in question not to be subjective. I'm going to sort of work with a quite objective, fundamental sense of chance here. It's not based on ignorance of certain further facts that this set up things. So I feel really bad giving this kind of slide as when I'm not like anything to do with like philosophy of physics or anything like that, and I don't think the probability is right here, but there is an illustrative example that we can draw on with indeterministic causation, and this is purely meant to be illustrative. What we can think about the decay of a radioactive particle, for instance, where we have a single fixed input and 2 incompatible outcomes. The particle either decay or remain stable, and if a single particle remains stable, then the fact that it does remain stable is causally dependent on, it can be explained in terms of the prior state of the world. But despite there being this kind of dependence and maybe causal explanation here, the outcome in question still isn't guaranteed. And we can say something similar, broadly anyway, about this case of indeterministic grounding, the quality of facts depend on Socrates' microphysical profile, despite the failure of necessitation. That's the very basic idea. And there are some interesting applications of indeterministic grounding in the literature at the moment. The key thing that I'm interested in, which I'm not really going to talk about here, is conceivability arguments. So there's been some discussion stemming really, I think, from Barbara Montero's paper in 2013, that we can use resources like indeterministic grounding to say something really interesting about conceivability arguments. So that's the main reason I'm interested in this kind of relation. But it's been put to work in some other areas, mechanistic explanation, Craver, phishing cases, personal identity literature, about data, again from data, spatiotemporal consignment problem. There's also some discussion about how a relation like this might say something cool about like free will as well. So in this talk, I'm going to assume that indeterministic grounding is at the very least coherent. I'm not going to try and argue that indeterministic, why we should accept this kind of relation. I'm more interested in, once we've got this kind of setup on the table, whether or not it's consistent with a physicalist theory, basically. And really, I think what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and take up the burden of proof here and argue that actually I'm going to try and resist an argument that I think gives us strong reasons to reject the compatibility here. Okay, so here's the problem that I see for well, would be indeterministic ground physicalist. So we might ask, can we use indeterministic grounding as a physicalist tool? Could we use it to connect levels, physical and phenomenal levels, for instance? Well, here's an argument that suggests that we just obviously can't do this. So, P1 physicalists need to reject the claim that grounds have multiple incompatible outcomes. So, remember, indeterministic grounding, as I've set it up, lets us precisely that. So, presumably, indeterministic grounding is incompatible with physicalism. And I think this is a fairly good argument. And I don't think it really comes up explicitly in the literature, but I think lots of people kind of assume that something like this is the case. So I think that P1 is true. So I think with a few exceptions, most physicalists think that some kind of supervenience thesis is a necessary condition for physicalism. And the supervenience theses that physicalists are typically committed to just don't allow the kind of dynamic intra-world variation that I've just described with indeterministic grounding. So not even weak global supervenience will give you this kind of intra-world variation. And nearly all philosophers, like I said, seem to see supervenience, I guess, as partially constituted with the notion of physicalism. So P1 is at least, I think, widely thought to be true. And P2 is just true given how I'm understanding indeterministic grounding. So this is the premise that I want to resist, challenge P1. And I want to say that physicalists can accept a picture in which a ground has multiple incompatible outcomes, each with a non-trivial probability. So when exactly are multiple incompatible outcomes antiphysical? So a common answer goes something like this. Say you've got Q's up here and Q's down here. If Q1 is physical, then Q1 has got to be nothing over and above P. But then consider what it means to say that. If Q1 is nothing over and above P, then it just looks like the obtaining of Q1 consists in and only in the obtaining of P. So it just doesn't seem to make sense that there could be variation there. How could Q1 be nothing more than P, or Q1 able to vary independently of P? It just seems that the mere obtaining of P suffices for the obtaining of Q1. So if P is compatible with multiple incompatible qualia facts, it just looks like those qualia facts are going to somehow outrun P. There's going to be more to the facts, those qualia facts, than P. So I'll limit my response to this kind of approach, and I'll assume this following broad form of physicalism, so nothing over and above, we know of physicalism. Every fact is either a fundamental physical fact, or it's nothing over and above a fundamental physical fact. Now, other ways to cash out physicalism, so you might take on something like Jonathan Schaffer's version of physicalism, where maybe this isn't going to be true. I think there's, I just have more to say about this kind of variant, and I think it's more surprising that this variant is gives some indeterministic grounding, basically. So, to show that Q1 is physical, we need to show that Q1 is nothing over and above P. That's the challenge. And then just briefly, here's a kind of, I guess a sub-argument for thinking that this just isn't going to be possible on nothing over and above physicalism. So we start with P3, where we have a phenomenal fact Q1 varying independently of the physical facts. That's just the idea of indeterministic grounding. We then have P4, we claim that if Q1 varies independently of the physical facts, then it's got to be something more than the physical facts. And again, that seems to make sense. So the reasons I basically just outlined. How could P doesn't be sure Q1, how could Q1 be nothing over and above P? And then finally, P5 just follows from the definition of Noah-physicalism. So according to Noah-physicalism, it seems really reasonable to say that Q1 is antiphysical, given this indeterministic grounding setup. And that's then the premise that I'm going to resist P4, where I want to say that Q1 can vary independently of the physical facts in a way that indeterministic grounding permits, but that Q1 can still be nothing over and above those physical facts. So, yeah, how does that work? How can you have Q1 varying independently and yet still be nothing over and above the physical facts? Well, look, I think unsurprisingly, this will just depend on how we cash out the notion of nothing over and above. And what I want to do here is offer a specific definition of nothing over and above that I think is quite strict in terms of what it counts as physicalism, or it counts as one thing being nothing over and above another. And there's also quite a natural way of understanding physicalism. And I'll just show that according to this definition, it seems like, well, under certain conditions, indeterministic grounding counts, or indeterministically grounded facts count as being nothing over and above their groundees. Okay, so here's the first pass at the reading of nothing over and above I'm interested in, and it's cashed out in terms of containment, so one thing being contained in another. This idea is sometimes used in the literature, and I've really taken inspiration from Trojan and Whitmer's paper on partial grounding, and here they use containment as a metaphor for when grounding secures nothing over and above us, basically. But the use is purely metaphorically. It's not meant to be like a precise account of what's going on. It's just it's just kind of to help illustrate what nothing over and above us might come down to. And I just want to push beyond the kind of metaphorical gloss here. And what I want to do is I want to propose a formulation of containment. I'm now going to really use containment star. It's just not quite the same formulation, but I'll just say containment so it's not like a mouthful. I want to suggest a reading of containment that firstly, it satisfies these two conditions. So P contains Q1, Q1 is going to be nothing over and above P, but also the fact that P contains Q1 is consistent with the fact that Q1 doesn't contain. That's kind of where I want. So to get into a more specific definition of containment, I think it's useful to ask, okay, well, what does it mean for one thing to contain another? Why should containment ensure nothing over and aboveness? Clearly there are different ways to understand what containment amounts to, and some of them just aren't going to secure nothing over and aboveness. So think about this first reading here, spatial encasement. If you're, I actually don't know how to pronounce this. Is it Agora? Is that how you say it? Yeah? Okay, the computer read it out weirdly the other day and I got panicked. But yeah, say you're Socrates and you're enclosed in your you're in there, you're enclosed by like 4 walls or something. It doesn't seem like that's going to satisfy nothing over and above this. It doesn't seem like being spatially enclosed by something means you're nothing more than that thing. Whereas these other accounts look a little bit more promising at least. So no illogical parthood, it seems like Socrates' left foot isn't anything more than all of Socrates. Logical containment might also guarantee nothing over and aboveness. It was quite stringent about the closure conditions. So this might require distinguishing logical containment from logical reducibility. And also essence-based accounts might be instructive as well. So these are all going to be illustrative cases, but if essential properties, say, are intrinsic properties, if some property is essential to some object, then that property is plausibly nothing more than that object. I don't know if that's true for property instantiation more generally, but I think that might be true for the case of essence. So we have some different varieties of what roughly look like containment, examples of containment, some of which might capture the notion that I'm after. And regardless of whether those kind of do meet the containment requirement for nothing over and aboveness, this is what I think definitions of, examples of containment that do secure nothing over and aboveness might have in common. And I've called this, called this containment star. I think it might be useful to understand this a little bit like what's the definition of big G grounding. Small containment relations, like the one I just mentioned, the ones I mentioned, so Parthood, logical containment, and essence perhaps, just being unified by having these kinds of features in common. So for P to contain Q1, firstly, P has to be all it takes for Q1 to obtain. There's no further condition that will help us secure Q1. P will generate Q1. Secondly, P has to encode the information about Q1. So that is, Q1 is somehow written into P. So if the junction has plausibly the individual conjuncts written into it, outcomes in some interesting sense might be written into laws. A thing might encode a property by having it as an essential property. A thing might encode another thing by having it as a part. The idea is that there are, some sort of small containment relations that might guarantee nothing over and aboveness, and they share this general sense of encoding or writing in. In all these cases, it seems like there's a sense in which information about the ground is present in the ground. And I should actually just point out that 1 and 2 obviously interact. So 2 on its own is going to let through cases where a fact is present in a ground, plays no role in bringing about that fact. So you might have a book that talks about like Gandalf, for instance, but it doesn't play any role in that generating a wizard, for instance. And in contrast, 1 is going to let through cases where the ground contains no information about the ground being, yet the fact is still generated. So it's according to immersion test theories, you might think that the physical facts are all it takes for the phenomenal facts to obtain, despite the fact that phenomenal facts are normal with respect to physical facts in some sense. And I'm also just going to insist that it has to be the case that whatever plays this kind of informational encoding role plays a significant role in the generation of the ground view as well. So this rules out cases where these conditions just happen to coincide, where the generation condition, say emergence generation, happens to coincide with the fact that some information is encoded. So with that definition of containment, we can offer this form of physicalism. Containment physicalism says that a fact is physical if and only if it's either a fundamental physical fact or it's contained in a fundamental physical fact. This is a fairly strict form of physicalism, as I hope is obvious. So not only does it have to be the case that P contains Q1, but P also has to encode information about Q1. And so I'm not going to argue that this is a really natural reading here, because I don't have time, but in the sort of longer paper I try and say a bit more about why this might be at least one natural way to understand nothing over and above. And I take it that this, like, to an extent, I mean, maybe not, it's not true, but this is going to be more informative to some extent than nothing over and above cashed out as a primitive. And it's also probably going to be broader than nothing over and above that's cashed out solely in terms of Parthood or identity, something like that. Okay, so how is containment physicalism meant to allow for independent variation while ensuring nothing over and aboveness? So consider this example. Suppose you have a probabilistic metaphysical law L, which isn't grounded in or reducible to P. There was some sort of group law that mediates the grounding connection. So the law tells us that the quality of facts can vary, even when all the physical facts are fixed, and the probability of each Q is just different. And so this can be taken out, but if you just assume for now that Moorian connections are fine, such that P and L are both acceptable to the physicalist. So if that's right, in this situation in which P and L both obtain seems to satisfy the two conditions for containment. Because it seems like the fact P and L is going to be all it takes for Q1 to obtain, because no further condition is going to help secure Q1. And it also seems like Q1 is encoded in P and L, because Q1 in some sense is written into L. I'm going to talk about these in a little bit more detail in a second. So just starting with this all it takes condition, okay, why is it satisfied? We'll compare partial deterministic grounding with full indeterministic grounding. I'm just assuming that you can have partial and full notions of deterministic grounding in the same way that you can have partial and full notions of deterministic grounding. It seems like a partial deterministic ground is not all it takes for a grounding to obtain. We have to add stuff to get the grounding. Grounding never obtains in this kind of situation. By contrast, it seems like a full indeterministic ground is able to bring about the grounding without any further additions. It's just the case that we don't need to add anything to generate the grounding. It's just the grounding will always be generated according to this this kind of theory. And again, we can draw a solely like illustrative analogy to the case of particle decay. The stated radius of the particle at 11 AM might be what it takes for the particle to decay at 11:01, but the state of the particle doesn't guarantee that it will decay at that particular time. And I should point out that other people have made this kind of comment about what it takes. I actually found after this that some people have literally used the what it takes language to do this with indeterministic grounding in other work as well. And I think in the Pierce work that I mentioned before, so I don't think I'm alone in thinking that this is plausible. So I think that the language of generation here is quite helpful. We can say that when P and L star, which actually says in indeterministic law, when they together merely partially deterministically ground Q1 is never generated, or in P and L, fully indeterministically ground Q1 is sometimes generated. And given this, I think it's quite natural to put full indeterministic grounding on the will it take side of this. Full deterministic grounding, full indeterministic grounding, I'm taking both to be kind of generative relations, they're both full relations in some metaphysically significant sense. So it strikes me that's a reasonable way to understand what it takes. And then the encoding condition, so part of me thinks this is less controversial, and part of me thinks I'm going to get picked up on this a lot. So Q1 seems to be encoded in P&L because, like I said, there seems to be some significant sense in which Q1 is written into L. So we're kind of writing in here, just thinking that there might be some interesting way in which laws encode their instances. I don't want to be understood as saying that they literally encode the particular instance itself, just that laws are, they're, I think of the way to phrase it. Laws don't brutally generate their instances when coupled with an antecedent. They generate their instances because they know about them or they encode them in some interesting sense. So there are different ways, obviously, to understand how laws might do something like this. And I think the information is crammed into the law itself. So in one example, which we're considering laws as universals, for instance, you might think that Q1 is encoded in L because L partially consists of a universal U, such that Q1 is an instance of U. And then here we have some worldly entity, U, that kind of carries the information about Q1. And U seems to be the right kind of thing to play a part in the generation of Q1 as well. So given that kind of situation, I set out as long as we're happy with P and L being physical, it seems like Q1 is going to satisfy the conditions of the table. But despite the fact that Q1 satisfies 1 and 2, Q1 can obviously still vary independently of the grounding base, because P and L might just as easily ground Q2 or Q3. So what's interesting here is that Q1 seems to be contained in P and L without having to exist in P and L. So the kind of short version of this is that this seems to be a reading of nothing over and above. It's plausible that lets a ground be vary independently of its ground while still being nothing over and above that ground. Okay, so in the longer version of the paper, I try and sort of do some damage control and explain why this isn't completely wacky. I think I have time to talk about one objection very quickly. So one worry that you might have is that P&L just isn't going to be physically acceptable because it's a group psychophysical connection. Maybe people like Schaffer are happy with this and willing to call this kind of theory of physicalism, but you really might not be if you're any other kind of physicalist. So I think this is a fair worry. And I've kind of used the example of laws because I just think it's a bit clearer how laws end up encoding their instances. It's quite a transparent case. And I think this shows something interesting anyway. I think it shows that even if you don't think this is a physicalist theory, you've got a notion of nothing over and aboveness such that this independent variation is allowed, which is that might not be acceptable to all physicalists. But if you're not happy with law, L being piece of physicalist machinery, I think you can drop mention of L and just talk about P. And I think things do get trickier in this context, but I'm not convinced it's going to be a problem in the end for my position. So all I want to do here is show that indeterministic grounding can be compatible with physicalism. So I'm not trying to use indeterministic grounding, say, to solve the explanatory gap problem. I think there is interesting stuff to say that, but that's kind of not my aim here. So I can help myself to this sort of standard physicalist assumption that the relationship between P and Q isn't transparent. That would be a paper sense. Yeah, we can say a number of things about what that relation might be. I'm kind of going to leave it mysterious here what this kind of opaque relation for physicalism like yours would be. In the longer version of the paper, I basically try and explain why there might be some reason to think that this relation genuinely does allow for indeterminism, and I haven't just stipulated it in a kind of roundabout way, but I'm going to leave that here. Okay, so here's a picture, and just quickly finally on this objection, here is maybe how the picture would look if you don't like mooring connections. You have these two conditions secured, but you have the outputs being contained in some mysterious sense in P. Maybe the containment here is like a standard known small containment relation, like essence or Parthood, and it's just opaque how that goes, or maybe it's an unknown containment relation. And equally, we can have versions of type B or type C physicalism that explain what's going on here in terms of why it's opaque. Okay, then finally, I just want to talk about one brief upshot of the view. So, if what I've said is kind of along the right lines, we make quite an interesting intervention in the literature. So Oldham Howard basically argued that, that's actually DMS's deterministic supervenance. I've just taken the slide from like the actual paper. So, but the idea is that they've argued against the position that physicalists can use indeterministic grounding and stuff, and their contention is basically that it violates the monistic commitments of physicalism, which I think is a good argument. And it seems to me though like containment physicalism will count as monistic, because it seems very intuitive to say that if everything in the sample space is nothing over and above the physical ground, it seems like we have, at least we're further towards the kind of monism than maybe some of the other literature that's discussed this stuff. And on that, there's another kind of thing within the longer paper where I try and actually say that the monistic commitments get met in another dimension as well, because it ends up being that physicalist indeterministic grounding is a lot more restricted than saying the dualist has. Like the sample space is a lot more restricted than what the dualist would have to get to, and that ends up helping things not look so disordered, basically, as you might think they would do. Okay, yeah, so to conclude, I think there's this plausible initial worry that indeterministic grounding can't be accepted by physicalists because it violates the supervenience of qualia facts and physical facts. And I've tried to provide one specific reading of nothing over and above this, according to which indeterministic grounding can sometimes be treated as physically acceptable. If the argument is successful, it adds to this growing idea that supervenience isn't a necessary condition for physicalism. And I think, that's it. Yeah, thanks.
So we'll now have comments from Gabrielle Purple out of University of Michigan, Ann Arbor.
Awesome. Thanks, Will, for a chance to think about these interesting questions. I'm going to mainly read my comments to just try to keep myself honest on time. Great. Okay, so I'm going to use this time to broadly make 3 comments about what I take to be 3 central steps in the argument. So they're going to be about the definition of containment star, why containment star is the best interpretation of nothing over and above, and why we should think that nothing over and above is analyzed in terms of containment star transits physicality. Right, so let's start with the definition of containment star. So I'm interested in whether the features of the relation that are described in the example you give in your paper are meant to generalize to every case where containment star is applied. So let me sort of briefly revisit the example in the paper. Oh, thank you. Noise. In the paper, you argue that P and L, in fact, P and L contains, I'm going to say contains, I mean contains star, Q1 because 2 conditions are met. And I should note that I'm not sure it was, just to be clear, P is the fact that the microphysical profile of the event of Socrates seeing flowers exists and has certain structural features, and Q1 is the fact that Socrates has sort of Socrates' phenomenal experience is instantiated and has certain qualitative features. And L is the law that when P obtains for any of Q1 through Q3, the probability that sort of one of those obtains is a third. Okay, so so you argue that these two conditions are met. P and L is all it takes to make Q1 the case, and P and L encodes information about Q1 because L encodes information about the set Q1 through Q3, and the set encodes Q1. Okay, so I'm going to ask some questions just to get a better sense of what this containment star relation is doing. So looking at the first condition, that P and L is all it takes to make Q1 the case, I can imagine someone worrying that maybe P and L is not all it takes to make Q1 the case, because we also need the fact that Q2 isn't the case and Q3 isn't the case for it to be that Q1 is the case. So this is mostly a request to expand a bit on why we should think that all it takes does not require these additional facts. And then with respect to the second condition, you stipulate so long as L encodes the set Q1 through Q3 and the set encodes Q1, then P and L encodes Q1. So it seems to me that you're relying on two assumptions here. One assumption is that encoding is transitive, so so L encodes Q1 by virtue of encoding the set. And then you also imply that adding information to a fact, which is encoding another, will allow it all to continue encoding that fact. So sort of second set of questions, are these conditions meant to apply always to the encoding relation, or are they specific to this case? And if they are specific to this case, why is it allowed in this case? And then sort of maybe as an aside, I think there's some reason to think that the second condition, that I can add information to what's encoding another fact, and it'll just keep encoding that fact, holds generally. There might be reason to question it. So here's an example. Let's say the fact that I can recite the first 25 digits of pi encodes the fact that I can recite the first 15 digits of pi right now. But the fact that I can recite the first 25 digits of pi, but the pressure of performance makes me forgetful, might not encode the fact that I can recite the first 15 digits of pi right now. Maybe I'm on a stage and I'm feeling nervous. So something to think about with this sort of second condition about adding information to what's doing the encoding. Okay, so that's sort of the first set of questions about your definition. Let me pivot to asking about reasons for treating containment star as your interpretation of nothing over and above. So you're going to point to examples of cases where it's more natural to say that Q1 is something over and above P to show that containment star is a natural reading of nothing over and above. And I worry that in this case, what you've shown is that it's maybe a natural reading, but not the only natural reading of nothing over and above. And I worry that what you need to show is that it's the only natural reading. So here's the concern. Someone might look at the biconditional, P transmits its physicality to Q1, if and only if Q1 is nothing over and above P, and think, well, no, containment star is one among many ways to interpret nothing over and above, but maybe it's not the correct way to interpret nothing over and above here with respect to the facts P and Q1. And maybe you'll think, well, the right way to interpret nothing over and above with respect to the facts P and Q1 will be a case in which physicality is not transmitted. So I sort of worry that you need a stronger claim here, right, for the argument to succeed, that containment star is either the best or only interpretation of nothing over and above, or that all sort of natural interpretations of nothing over and above ensure physicality transmission. Okay, so one final comment about why we should think containment star ensures physicality transmission. So I want to appeal to one of the examples you used in your paper, and I think it was sort of briefly up on the slides. So you argue that the notion of containment that allows for physicality transmission can be devised by looking at shared features of cases of containment for which there is physicality transmission. These are logical containment, mereological parthood, and essence. So I'm going to talk a little bit about essence. So you argue that by definition, the essence of P contains Q1 because it's all it takes for Q1 to obtain is that it encodes the information about Q1. And then you then say that whatever is in the essence of a physical object is physical, so physicality transmission is ensured. And I wonder if there's another natural reading of essence on which it's not the case that whatever is in the essence of a physical object is physical. So if this is the case, then the essence of P would still contain Q1 because the conditions on containment star will still be met, in part because they were sort of, I think, designed to capture this case of essence amongst other things. But if we're not committed to the thought that the essence of a physical object is physical, it doesn't ensure physicality transmission. So then I would worry that this spot conditional that you're relying on, P transmits its physicality to Q1, if only if Q1 is nothing over or above P, might not hold if this case of essence sort of is captured by nothing over and above, but is not capturing physicality transmission. Okay, so these are sort of three really broad questions about three of what I take to be the crucial steps in the paper, and I'm hopeful that sort of asking them and hearing your answers will give me a better sense of some of the details of the definitions here. So thank you again for a really interesting paper, and I'm looking forward to your response.
Thanks, Gabrielle. We now have a response from Will.
Just got to find it on my phone. Okay, so yeah, so the first set of questions were to do with containment star and how I'm understanding it. So you asked how is it appears all it appears all it takes Q1, and you asked again if we need to say that the other Qs don't obtain as well. What ensures, why should P be all it takes for Q1 if those negative facts are also required? I think all I really have to say on that one, maybe I need to think about this, I've got at least to say about this, I think, is just that I've sort of assumed that all of the Qs are mutually exclusive here, in which case just the obtaining of one of them is going to rule out the obtaining of the others. So I don't know if that helps. On the encoding thing, so L encodes, omega and omega codes Q1. So, yeah, your suggestion is, okay, this suggests that encoding is transitive, just given how I set things up. And I think the request seems to be, okay, are these general conditions on containment more generally? So, is it the case, for instance, that encoding is always transitive? And is it the case that, and also is it the case that encoding is monotonic? So I wasn't sure about the counterexample to encoding, so being able to recite the first 25 digits of pi, and then that encodes being able to recite the first 15 digits of pi now, and then there's some blocker, the pressure performance needs to be nervous. So I think there may be counterexamples to this principle. But the first thing I'd say is I'm not convinced this one is, but I can't think of what other examples there might be. In this case, it seems like really what I want to say is encoded in my ability to recite pi to 25 digits would be the fact that I can, my ability to recite pi to 15 digits minus the now. And the now is doing lots of important work there. But I think I can probably say something about what happens even in the case if there are some counterexamples to encoding being monotonic in this way. I think I can kind of appeal to the ways in which grounding, for instance, is sometimes taken to be like, transitivity isn't meant to be like a general rule for grounding, for instance. You think about the Chapman indented sphere. It seems like, so Sillingberger makes this point in Unity of Grounding paper that he has. It says, okay, well, it looks like fine grounding isn't generally transitive, but that doesn't undermine cases where it is transitive, where transitivity does hold in some sense. So I think all I need for this argument to go through is just to be able to lean on the fact that the encoding that I'm talking about here is monotonic, but I'm unconvinced by that response. And sorry, I'm very, I realise actually having this on my phone is like really difficult to get my thoughts together on this. So the next group of questions were, why is containment star a natural reading with nothing over and above? So one thing that I say in the paper is that I think it does kind of satisfy my own intuitions about one thing being nothing over and above another. It doesn't seem clear to me in what sense Q1 can be thought of as being something over and above P when there's conditions in there. I don't think that's going to convince anyone who isn't already on board, like you kind of say. And I'm trying to give some further reasons for thinking that containment is natural in the paper as well, that don't just rely on intuition. So one example, which I think you mentioned, is the idea that containment star prevents a lot of, gets a lot right, basically. So there are a lot of cases where we want to say that one thing is something over and above another, and containment star seems to get all of those cases right, bar some, maybe that's questioning, bar some instances of indeterministic grounding. And that general ability, I guess, to kind of carve up the landscape in the right way suggests to me that indeterministic grounding, that containment star is doing good work there. It seems like there are just a few cases of indeterministic grounding that get through according to this notion, but it doesn't cause problems in other for other examples of talking about why one thing is something over and above another. So Gabrielle worried that that kind of argument as well might not be enough to show that containment is the best reading of nothing over and above this. It doesn't follow just from the fact that it gets quite a lot right, that it's the best reading, and then the worry seems to be, I don't feel I need to show that it's the best reading. So I agree that that's not enough to show it's the best reading. I more generally don't know if I need to show that it's the best reading of nothing over and above. I think I kind of hope that all I need to do is show that it's a plausible reading. So think about the identity reading of nothing over and above, for instance. Say I, for some reason, live in a world where everyone thinks that nothing over and above this is contingent in the kind of way that I said. If I can show that the identity is a nice natural reading of nothing over and aboveness, and that gives us necessitation, it kind of seems to me like that's the work has been done there. It kind of seems like I'm trying to use this as a counterexample to the kind of general dogma that nothing over and aboveness or physicality transmission requires the kind of supervenient species I was talking about. Another example might be trying to show that contingent grounding satisfies, not contingent grounding, so contingent identity satisfies nothing over and aboveness. So it seems like, maybe this is a vague question, but it seems like if I could show that contingent grounding, obviously with the kind of modal profile we would expect, or something like that, so contingent identity, if that satisfied our intuitive understanding of nothing over and above this, it seems again like that would be a kind of counterexample to the idea that nothing over and above this always comes alongside necessitation. So I think maybe the best way to view this is as sort of as a counterexample to necessitation, rather than something that has to be true. I hope that what I need is a claim that the claim is plausible. And then there was another worry on this about containment physicalism either being the only interpretation, nothing over and above, it needs to be that's the only interpretation, or all genuine formulations of nothing over and aboveness should transmit physicality. I think is how I understood that. And just on that, I think I'd say that I don't think it's controversial to say that readings of nothing over and aboveness will transmit physicality. I hope that helps a bit. And finally, the third set of questions about why containment should transmit physicality. So the first just general thing I want to say is that it does really hinge on whether or not it's a good reading of nothing over and above. I am not the only reading of nothing over and above. But you talked a bit about essence and the idea that maybe something purely physical object might have something non-physical in its essence, so that would be, you could understand a reading of essence along those lines. And then essence would no longer be a good example of physicality transmission. So I think I have two things to say on that. The first is just that, maybe if that's true, the account could just take the hit and say, okay, look, I'm just interested in the accounts of essence those aren't the accounts of essence I'm interested in. It's actually just these accounts of essence, and that's enough to work as an illustrative example. The other thing I kind of want to say, because I think the point was that, this anti-physicalist notion of essence is going to satisfy my conditions for containment, and then that will then pose a problem for me. So I think it will be true on that, whatever that reading of essence turns out to be, that containment is satisfied, whatever it is in the essence profile is contained in P, say, but I just don't think, and I think maybe what that shows is that nothing over and aboveness, or this reading of nothing over and aboveness can be used in context outside physicalism. So it can still be interesting to the dualist whether one thing is something over and above another. So one antiphysical thing can be nothing over and above another antiphysical thing. So I think my intuition would just be to say, okay, look, if something has antiphysical properties in its essence, I don't think that's a version of physicalism. I think we talked about the example where there's some man and he looks perfectly like normal and physical, but then like on the apocalypse he can do really cool stuff like the sort of destiny or something like that. And I mean, I just kind of want to say that that guy isn't physical, like he's not an entirely physical being, because in his essence profile maybe there's the ability to wield the sword of destiny or something like that, assuming that's antiphysical. So I think that's
Well,
most
you're
of what I'd
just
say.
leading into your Q&A, this might
Cool.
just you.
No, I think that's all I have to say. Yeah.
Oh, great, okay. So we now have 13 minutes for Q&A. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and leave it up, and I'll call everything in a certain order.
Oh, thanks. I want a few things we talked about before. So it's just a small question about, Gabrielle asked about the essence illustration. I wanted to ask about the Parthood based on the Mariology case. So why exactly is that containment star? So because obviously it's objects that are parts of each other rather than facts. I'm wondering what the facts are that are meant to do the containing, because it's not like Socrates existing is all it takes for his life to exist. Or the information of his existence doesn't encode the information of his life's existence, because you can cut his life off, right? So how exactly does that work as a case of containment star?
I mean, I think there's an extent to which...
So actually, finish the question. So when you were then talking about it, you worded it as not Socrates containing the part, it was like all of Socrates containing star, the part, which also then made it look almost closer to a case of logical containment, right? Because once you got all of them, maybe you're thinking of all the parts. Yes, the parts contained in all the parts, but it was Socrates that was meant to be the initial illustration.
I think that was mostly kind of to avoid the idea that Socrates might be like a macroscopic object that can kind of change its parts. I was just interested in where you've got like one collection of stuff, and that's Socrates, and then you say, okay, any proper part of him is going to be contained. Just because it's so in this kind of literature, there's a worry that if I'm talking about necessitation, I could be understood along the lines of someone like Alex Garls talking about like objects as things that aren't necessitated by their parts, for instance, or something like that, which is not the way I try to do. So that might be there might be like an issue of just setup there. I think more generally we're right about the fact stuff though. It's like this formulation is meant to be illustrative in some sense, and maybe it's not. Maybe it's just not the case that containment finds out completely here. I mean, I think I'd have to think about it a bit more. It's not going into my head right now, but I'll have a bit of a think about that. Thanks.
Alex?
Thank you for the talk. That was fun. I might be confused, and so if so, please resolve this confusion for me. But I want to maybe try to come at one of the things Gabrielle said from a different angle. So you said that Q1, Q2, and Q3 are supposed to be mutually exclusive, right? And so you want to be able to say all it takes for Q1 to obtain is that P obtains.
Yeah.
And likewise, all it takes for Q2 to obtain is that P obtains. Right? And that entails that Q1 did not obtain, but Q2 doesn't. So that puts you in the position of wanting to say all it takes for Q1 or not Q1 to obtain is for P to obtain. Right? And that, it feels like we've stumbled upon some indication that we don't have all it takes to decide whether Q1. that's what I took her first question to be about. It seems like you need also that Q2 and Q3 don't obtain in order to have all it takes for Q1. So please resolve if I'm confused.
I feel like you need, would you mind just kind of saying again how that arises? Because it,
if all it takes for Q1 to obtain is for P to obtain, and if all it takes for Q2 to obtain is for P to obtain, and if Q2's obtaining entails that Q1 did not obtain, then it seems like we have the case where all it takes for Q to obtain is Q1 to obtain is that P obtains. All it takes for not Q1 to obtain is for P to obtain.
oh right, what, so it's okay, yeah, so it's so the negative facts then get ground.
I'm not
It's-
sure. It just feels
yeah.
like we haven't identified all that it takes for Q1 to obtain. If the same state of affairs,
Yeah. Yeah, so just sorry, just to make sure. But so the worry is that not Q1. All it takes for not Q1 to obtain
it's the same thing it takes for
is
all.
what it takes.
Yeah. And that's just an indication that it's not clear that we've gotten all that it takes for Q1 to obtain.
Yeah. I mean, would the sorry, I know to ask you like questions as well, but I do think that case would apply to causation as well. If you have an indeterministic notion of causation where you have two outputs, it kind of seems like something like that. I mean, maybe all I need to say is that sure, it is all it takes under this kind of setting, but it's not like I think I'd be worried that a consequence of that would be that you have negative facts being grounded as well, for instance, whether in this kind of setup, and I feel like maybe that can be resisted if the negative facts aren't encoded or something like that. But you know, that's helpful. I thought a while ago about like the negative fact stuff, and then I haven't really thought much about it.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's necessarily negative facts. It's just like an entailment of Q2 obtaining that Q1 does not obtain, because you want to say they're mutually exclusive. Anyways,
Yeah.
we can
Yeah,
continue on.
no, that's helpful.
Yeah, I know I am confused, so. And it's kind, so here's the train of thought. I was trying to figure out, well, so, the argument, the anti-physicalist argument starts with the premise that some phenomenal fact varies independently of the physical facts. And then I, of course, fit right in everything else. By itself, that doesn't seem like a reason for thinking that something's not physical. I mean, for your horizontal indeterminism case, the alpha emission, there's nothing non-physical about that.
Yeah.
What was puzzling me was like, well, sort of like this, so you've got Q1, Q2, Q3 coded, all it takes. Well, but surely there's something else. But of course, indeterminism says, no, there isn't anything else. So, I guess maybe, the only question I can think to ask here is, why would you think that would render the things non-physical?
So why in the first place would this kind of independent variation be
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess the way that I was thinking about it was that, I mean, firstly it seems like, I mean, I don't think that, but it seemed like in the literature, most people take this as an assumption that it would be. The best I can say is that people seem to think along the lines of, okay, well, there are these notions that are important to vertical dependence for physicalists that maybe aren't important for causation. So things like nothing over and above, things like constitution, stuff like that, and yeah, I guess the thought is that independent variation won't allow those sorts of things to be preserved. So the aim is to kind of just sketch out a way in which something like nothing over and above gets preserved even in this context. But I mean, yeah, if you're already happy with the idea that independent variation might not be anti-physical, I mean, this is an argument that Laison makes in a paper that kind of touches on this sort of stuff, and he calls it, I think people have called it, he's called an analogy argument. And yeah, the idea there is to make that exact point, is to say, well, look, there's nothing wrong with indeterminism, there's nothing anti-physical about indeterminism diachronically, so why should there be anything like wrong with it in the case of grounding? And I guess to me, I'm slightly unpersuaded by that for all the reasons that physicalists often often say that there's some further, say, hyperintentional notion of dependence, or for instance, it isn't to do with like just supervenience that we want to capture. Does that help? Yeah.
I might insert myself at this point, to circle back a bit to Alex's discussion, as a kind of like friendly response. So I think it's generally much harder to get negative facts than positive ones, because negative facts require like, and nothing else happens, that would give rise to the thing. So negative facts like Q2 fails to obtain, or Q1 fails to obtain. So I feel like you might be able to have Q1 obtaining is like nothing over and above P obtaining. And you might have that like Q2 failing to obtain is nothing over and above Q1 obtaining and no other instance of P obtaining. But you're not going to get just a like straight transitivity, because you have to add that like and nothing else happens that might have given rise to like an additional, like there's no additional like duplicate ground is the thing that you might need. Are you amenable to that friendly suggestion, or would you be concerned with?
I don't know. I mean, in general, I am a bit worried about kind of what you've said. I mean, I guess the way that I was thinking about it was that you have these different qualia inverts. The physical one determines which one actually gets grounded, and yeah, then you can talk about one day what it takes for the other, given what it takes for any of these to obtain. I don't think I'm getting the worry from either of you, to be honest. I think, which is obviously my opinion. I'd be interested to hear more about it, or to have it explained again to me, because I'm just not sure I completely got it.
This is just a suggestion based on something I think I heard in the response to the comments, and please tell me if I'm wrong about this. I thought I heard you say something like, it seems to me that all natural readings of nothing over and above will transit physicality, and I would maybe suggest resisting, resist going in that direction or saying that, in part because I think like the work Containment seems to be doing in the paper is showing that is making it the case that you can show this biconditional P transmits its physicality to Q1 if only Q1 is nothing over and above P. Like the work Containment is doing is like to sort of give force to that conditional, and if you by just saying, oh well, nothing over and above is all natural readings will transmit physicality, I think you like lose sort of the force of that part of the argument. It's just a suggestion.
I guess it was just really intuitive to me that if one thing is nothing over and above another, if the first thing is physical, the second thing will be as well. But so what would be the problem of so why should I reject that?
I don't think you should reject that. I just think like I would resist using that as the sort of reason. So I think you want to assert the biconditional, but then the reason you give for asserting the biconditional is that we're analyzing nothing over and above in terms of containment star, which transmits physicality. And so I'd worry that if you use I think the intuition is fine. I just don't think the intuition should be the driving reason that the biconditional holds if you want containment star to be doing the work.
Okay. Yeah, I guess for me, containment star was plausible because it linked up to those. Because I thought it linked up to those pre-theoretical ideas. Because without that, I'm not really sure how it. Yeah. Because I mean, like I was saying to your question, it seems like one of the reasons to think that. Independent variation like this is antiphysical is that these things, like nothing over and above, get violated. I think they're pretty, nothing over and above is often at least used in a pretty primitive way when talking about this kind of stuff. So I guess the aim is to try and capture some of that, even if not all. So even if say that not all of the the pre-theoretical notion is retained, I really feel like I need to retain some of that, because otherwise I'm not sure what the account would be doing, I guess.
Okay, so we have come to the end of the session. Everyone please join me in thanking Will.